Welcome back to the Lydia McGrew channel. Today I'm going to continue talking about Dr. Gary Habermas's unfortunate misunderstandings of the Jesus seminar, which I've been talking about for the past several weeks. I'm going to begin with a quotation from Dr. Habermas's book in which he discusses C.H. Dodd and the Jesus seminar and Raymond Brown. I have I believe it's 4-part blog post series on Dr. Habermas's misunderstandings of C.H. Dodd. I'm probably not going to be able to entirely disentangle this discussion of the misunderstandings of the Jesus seminar from that discussion of Dodd, but I'll try not to duplicate too much what's in those blog posts. Dodd is a little more moderate, we might say, than the Jesus seminar. And so he doesn't even always use certain terms in the same way that they do. My focus is supposed to be on Habermas's misunderstandings of the Jesus seminar, but those are intertwined to some extent with his misunderstandings of Dodd. So I'm going to start by reading a quotation. This is from pages 870 to 871. I got it from the Kindle edition of Habermas's On the Resurrection, Volume 1. Here we go. This is Habermas. On C.H. Dodd's very influential grid of concise narratives versus the tales or circumstantial accounts already discussed in an earlier chapter, the concise passages indicate those gospel texts that are drawn directly from the oral tradition or that represent most closely the corporate oral tradition of the primitive church. And those are short quotes from Dodd. Habermas continues, the significance here is that these concise narratives are deemed likeliest to be reliable reports. According to these widely used standards, John 20, 19 through 21 makes the grade as a concise narrative, while John 20, 26 through 29 is viewed as a sort of appendage to the earlier account in that it depends on it for much of its meaning. Perhaps quite surprisingly, the Jesus seminar also lists John 20, 19 through 23 as a concise account, while referring to John 20, 26 to 29 as an intermediate story, which is also a category used by Dodd. The seminar employs this group of texts as those ranked somewhere in between concise passages and legends. Brown, that's being Raymond Brown, also agrees with Dodd, given a few caveats regarding the concise designation for John 20, 19 through 23, though he concludes that John actually created the Thomas story. Still, this is the crucial sentence, the respect given to at least the first appearance to the disciples, he means in John 20, and to a lesser degree, the Thomas account, at least for Dodd and the seminar, all the way across the wide range of views from Brown and Dodd to the members of the Jesus seminar is rather amazing. Okay, so some background to help you understand this. If you look in your Bible, the John 20, 19 through 21 or 19 through 23 tells of the first time Jesus appears to his male disciples on Easter Day. Okay, and so he's just there among them and so forth. All right, it's brief, especially 19 through 21. It's only 3 verses long. And then 26 through 29, John 20, 26 through 29, is the Doubting Thomas story. So what Habermas is doing here is he's saying that at least for that first appearance in John of Jesus to his male disciples, all these people give some respect, some historical respect to that story. Raymond Brown, C.H. Dodd, and the Jesus seminar. Now, I'm not sure that it's a wide range of views among these. I wouldn't necessarily regard that range as that wide. They're all fairly liberal scholars, but you could regard Brown and Dodd as somewhat more moderate than the Jesus seminar. A little bit of a range. All right, but he's saying that all of these give respect historically to that first story And he says this is rather amazing. So there's supposed to be something amazing, or at least rather amazing, about the extent of the respect that the Jesus Seminar gives to the story in John 20:19 through 23 of Jesus' appearance to his male disciples. And then he also implies that the Jesus Seminar and Dodd give some respect to the Doubting Thomas story, though he says to a lesser degree. And notice that this is because evidently he picked up on the fact that Raymond Brown thinks the Doubting Thomas story was created by John. He says he, that is Brown, concludes that John actually created the Thomas story. He doesn't seem to realize, and we're going to be getting into this today, that the seminar, the Jesus Seminar, is at least as clear as Brown is that John completely made up the Doubting Thomas story. And as I've shown in a blog post, it's also clear that the Doubting Thomas story is made up. So somehow he picked up on that from Brown, but he didn't pick up on that from them. So he thinks because they call it an intermediate account, they're giving respect to it, but a lesser degree than if they had called it a concise account. All right. Now you can read that quotation in Dr. Habermas's book. And you can verify that that's what he's saying. That the Jesus Seminar has some respect for these accounts, especially for the first one, and to a lesser degree, the Thomas account. Okay, now I usually hesitate to use the word prove in a non-deductive context as a philosopher. You know, I like to save proof for mathematical proof and so forth. Okay, but in an informal sense, the evidence I'm going to bring today is going to, quote unquote, prove that the Jesus Seminar gives no respect historically whatsoever, zilch, none, nada, okay, none whatsoever, to either the first or the second account of Jesus' appearance to his male disciples in the Gospel of John. Just none. And they're very explicit about it. They're very clear about it. What's tripping Habermas up here is that at some point along the way, he decided that legend in the Jesus Seminar's terminology is the only category, at least this is my conjecture as to how this confusion happened. It's the only category that's completely fiction, and that concise indicates historical respect because he thinks that's what Dodd means by it, so he assumes they're meaning the very same thing, and then that intermediate is somehow, you know, some respect that's in between quite a lot of respect for the concise and legend, which means it's all fiction. And that's just a complete misunderstanding of the way the Jesus Seminar is using these terms. In fact, it's partially a misunderstanding of the way Dodd is as well. Dodd gives, I would say, rather some respect, though of a rather low degree, to the concise accounts. And the concise, by the way, this is all very subjective. Dodd takes his little, scissors and cuts out these little snippets and pretends that he's come up by means of some objective form critical process with this snippet as, the thing that's closest to the oral tradition. He has no good argument for that. In fact, even the shift here between 19 through 21 and 19 through 23 is an indication of how subjective this is, because Dodd doesn't include in that concise, what he calls concise story, Jesus breathing on the disciples, even though that's just part of the narrative of that first appearance. So it's all a lot of form critical hogwash anyway. It's not some kind of, respectable standard. Even for those concise snippets that Dodd thinks are, most close to the corporate oral tradition of the primitive church, he still thinks there are bits even there that are made up, especially, no surprise, the ones where people are able to, touch Jesus and so forth. He calls them, I think, apologetic expansions. I discussed that in my series. So there's not even a correct understanding of Dodd here. And as for once you get to an intermediate or mixed terminology in Dodd, all bets are off. Dodd thinks that Doubting Thomas was completely made up, and I substantiate that in my series, my blog post series, which I'll link. So there's even a misunderstanding of Dodd here. But it's even worse for the Jesus Seminar, because for the Jesus Seminar, even the concise designation has pretty much nothing to do with historicity. It's entirely a form-critical concept. And here's what I mean by that. Concise, as the term indicates, means something is short. Well, partly it's short because you deliberately clipped it out, and you're holding that up as being short, But it's short and it's not very literary. This is true in Dodd as well. And then intermediate means it's a little bit longer and maybe a little more literary. But that doesn't mean for the Jesus Seminar that when something is hardly literary at all, it's largely historical. That doesn't follow. Something in their view, concise, can be just like completely made up out of whole cloth, as I'll demonstrate in a moment here. Dodd, you can see the literary nature of this intermediate category. He says that Thomas is not a well-developed literary character. Thomas is a stereotype. He's the type of the doubter. All right? So the story is made up, but it's John's not putting in the trouble, as you might say, to make it sound realistic and make Thomas seem like a deep character and so forth. So again, it's just this form-critical designation. And then legends or tales, tales I think is Dodd's word and legends is the Jesus Seminar word, those have the most literary polish to them. Okay, so they're, tale-telling at its best. The story of the two on the road to Emmaus, that's how they look at those. But that doesn't mean that the categories that don't rise to that literary height are historical or even more historical or even partially historical. It's just that the authors are doing more literary work on certain parts to make them into, fun and interesting stories. So if you follow that, you start to understand how this confusion arose, that Habermas thinks, okay, it's not a legend. Well, okay, at least it's not a legend. It's intermediate. It's like partly a legend. Or it's concise. Wow, that's rather amazing. Now, as we're about to see, there's nothing rather amazing at all about what the Jesus Seminar thinks about either of those things. Either the first story in John, or of the appearance in John 20, starting in verse 19, or of the Doubting Thomas story. It's just what you would expect. They think they're both completely made up. And the use of the word concise doesn't mean anything different, and it doesn't even indicate any inconsistency in them. That's just how they use the words. Okay, so it's not like, hey, you called it concise. To be consistent, you're obliged to consider it at least partially historical. No, they're not. It's a short little snippet. That's what they mean by concise. That's all they ever meant. Okay, so let's go to some of these quotations. All right. I'm going to go to John 20, 19 through 23. This is on page 487. And here's what they say explicitly. This is in the Jesus Seminar book, The Acts of Jesus, the book he's supposedly using, the book in which he looked and cited the fact that they call it concise. All right? So that's the book they got it from. But right here, this is what they say. As in the other versions, the fellows found nothing in the Johannine account that can be viewed as a historical report. It is therefore designated black. Now, that's about as clear as you can get. The Jesus Seminar, they use these color designations. They designated it black, as indeed they do for all the stories of Jesus appearing to a group of his disciples. And they even say that that's as in the other versions, so that there's nothing in the Johannine account that can be viewed as a historical report. that's about John 20:19 through 23. So what do you mean? The respect given all the way across the range of views from Brown and Dodd to the members of the Jesus Seminar is rather amazing. No, there's nothing at all amazing there, okay? They do not think that this is deemed likeliest to be a reliable report. They think it's got nothing remotely historical about it. All right. Now let's go down to what they say about doubting Thomas. All right, also beginning on page 487. The account of Jesus' appearance to Thomas a week after his appearance to the 11 was not originally connected to the appearance to the 11. Indeed, the appearance to Thomas is a retelling of the appearance to the 11. Verse 26 recapitulates verse 19, and verse 27 recalls verse 20. When Thomas blurts out, "My Master, my God," in verse 28, we have evidence that this tradition developed very late. In the earlier strata of the New Testament, Jesus is never referred to as God, although claims have been made for the Thomas story as an independent tradition. The fellows were inclined to regard it as a late and fictional tale, and of course, no surprise, it's coded black. Okay, they could not be more explicit. So they give no respect, and calling it intermediate doesn't indicate any degree of respect from them historically, just as calling the earlier passage in that chapter concise doesn't indicate any degree of historical respect. So much for considering intermediate stories to be ranked as if that's a historical ranking, partway between concise and legends. They do call Doubting Thomas intermediate, but that doesn't mean anything about its historicity. Using a more ordinary usage of the term legend, according to the Jesus Seminar, all of the stories of Jesus appearing to groups are legend. They're all fiction because they're all designated black. Okay, all right. I for a bonus here, this has been about the stories in John, but I'm just going to read you a little bit from the Jesus Seminar concerning the first appearance to the male disciples in Luke. Luke's account of Jesus' appearance was constructed, therefore, in a manner consistent with the expectations of his audience and in accordance with his own theological views. The fellows of the Jesus Seminar were nearly unanimous, however, in judging Luke's narrative to be without historical foundation. Luke's legacy in this passage, as in many others, is not history, but affirmation, not a rehearsal of facts, but an ingredient of his proclamation. So there's a bonus about a different appearance story, in that being the one in Luke. All right. Now, I just want to back out a little bit here. Is the proposition that Jesus appeared on at least one occasion to the group of his male disciples known as the 12 or known as the 11 acknowledged to be true by some, overwhelming majority of scholars across the scholarly spectrum? Now, I've emphasized many times that the meaning of an appearance experience is very broad. So it actually wouldn't surprise me all that much if you could find a majority, because it can mean anything. I mean, it could mean a sense of presence or something, or it could mean, as I've mentioned in the previous video, people all sort of being together and in ecstasy, and each one sees something in his mind that's different from what the other ones see, kind of a mental imagery or something that's nothing like what even the phenomenology would be of the stories that we have in the Gospels. And I think that's probably what Gerd Ludemann pictures. But that's why I say we shouldn't be using Gerd Ludemann and the quotation about him and so forth, about, where he says that it's undoubted that the disciples experienced, some kind of appearance of experience, which they took to be an appearance of the risen Jesus, because it could mean anything. So I'm not even saying that's all that unlikely. But where's the data coming from? Okay? In his big book on the resurrection, Dr. Lacona designates that that there was at least one group appearance to the group known as the 11 or the 12 as part of historical bedrock. And he's been very clear in his use of the phrase historical bedrock, that one of the requirements for that, necessary condition, not a sufficient condition, is that it is believed by a large majority of contemporary scholars. So he's very clear about that. So he must believe that that is believed by a large majority of contemporary scholars. And he cites a number of scholars that do seem to be granting that some kind of a group experience, even though they're very liberal, individual scholars. Other quotations he gives, they just say Jesus' disciples thought that they saw him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they saw him all when they were all together, okay, all at once, much less anything like what we find in the Gospels. So we need to be careful of slippage there. But at a certain point, he does sort of punt to Habermas. You know, Gary Habermas has read all of this and done all of this and so forth. And so I have to ask, to what extent does even that claim that the large majority of scholars across the spectrum agree that the 12 had an experience of seeing Jesus, a group experience of seeing Jesus after his resurrection, or that they took to be, him resurrected, to what extent does that arise from Habermas's misunderstandings? Because we've seen right here, it's just very emphatic that it's so amazing, rather amazing, that these groups, including the Jesus Seminar, give respect to at least John's first account of Jesus appearing to his 10 out of his 11 remaining disciples, and then that they give a lesser degree of respect, but still some, apparently more than Raymond Brown, to the Thomas account. But it's completely wrong. Now, I want to give credit where credit's due here. Dr. Licona actually says that the Jesus Seminar is doubtful about whether there was ever any appearance to the 12. He has it in a footnote in his resurrection book. But he still asserts that it's historical bedrock and that it's believed by this large majority of scholars. And I don't know anymore if that's true. Even after we've done all the watering down, even after we've made it as vague as possible and we're able to rope in people who think that they had an experience that was nothing like the experiences that would actually justify them in believing that Jesus was raised bodily. Even so, given the very severe misunderstandings that we're finding here of the Jesus Seminar on the part of Gary Habermas, I'm not sure that this majority claim, much less this overwhelming majority claim, is even true. It's kind of important to realize just how far off these interpretations are, and that's why I've been reading you these quotes. Habermas enthusing about how this is rather amazing what the Jesus Seminar acknowledges, and then the Jesus Seminar saying there's absolutely nothing historical about it and we've therefore coded it black. It's like, it's not amazing. That's what I expect from the Jesus Seminar. Not even a little bit amazing. So we've got a real problem if we're using that minimal facts approach. Okay, I think probably the only remaining video I'm going to do in this series concerns Dale Allison and his opinion concerning the conversion of James. So that's what I'm planning to do next time. I will link in the show notes the 4-part series on C.H. Dodd. So please come back next time to the Lydia Magruder channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.